In 1864, there were 3 separate fires here in Queen Street. The third one, which began on the 1st of December, was certainly the largest and most destructive. That became known as the Great Fire of Brisbane. In this video, I'm going to be exploring Queen Street and visiting the places where the fire began and where it spread to. And I'm going to have this book to help me along. Oh, to hell with the book. I've got the author. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, good morning, Rob. Hi.
In the early 1860s, a prolonged drought was keenly felt in the town of Brisbane. Despite being the largest settlement in the colony with a population of 12,551, Brisbane was in every way a frontier town. Rough, dirty, crowded and noisy. There were no building regulations. Human waste was dumped along the river, and water was drawn either from Wheat Creek or the grubby reservoir at Roma Street. An advertisement for the Brisbane sawmills on William Street mentioned that the owner trusts that for the ensuing year he will be able to supply the demand for sawn timber better than he has lately been able to do, owing to the continuous dry weather. It was only a matter of time before the spark was lit. Round about here, outside the old National Australia Bank, I think it was, yeah, National Australia Bank, this is where Fegan's grocery store was, and this is where the first fire broke out on the 11th of April 1864. That fire burnt down 14 buildings along Queen Street. And apparently Fegan went off to San Francisco, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, to work in the silver mines or something. Silver. Yeah, and it's interesting because there is a Brisbane in San Francisco. Yeah, there is, and I always wondered how Brisbane in San Francisco got its name because, I mean, in your book it talks about the Brisbaneites wandering around San Francisco. Yes, I'm wondering if they had something to do with it. Yeah, we're doing one on the Great Fire of Brisbane from 1864.
Oh, I'm Rob.
Oh, Rob. Oh, nice to meet you.
This is Jack.
Jack, g'day. Christmas shopping already. Right. And outside this store, this is, well, it looks like it's something in Korean, Uni QLO. I don't know what that means. But there was a guy called, what was it, Richard? Yeah, Richard Ash Kingsford. He had a drapery store here. He was the grandfather of Charles Kingsford Smith. Anyway, that building went down as well. And the very next day after the fire on April the 12th, a fellow, or could have been a woman as well, I don't know, by the name of S, wrote a letter to the Brisbane Courier bemoaning the fact that there was no fire brigade here in Brisbane. Portentous words indeed for what was to come. Pretty soon after this second fire, an inquest was held into the causes of it, and someone very conveniently for us today drew this wonderful diagram of this part of Queen Street showing the buildings that had been lost. Now the second fire was down on Refuge Row. Refuge Row was down pretty much where the Apple store is today, and that was the place where the people who had lost their businesses in the first fire in April went down there and set up temporary premises while those businesses were being rebuilt up this end of Queen Street. But then Refuge Row burnt down, and that was on 5th of September. So that's 2 fires now in 1864. So we're here on the intersection of Queen and Albert Streets, and our story moves to the third fire, the Great Fire of Brisbane, and it pretty much covers that block over there where the former Myer Centre is. Do you remember what the Myer Centre is called now? It's Uptown or something, isn't it? It's changed its name, I'm not sure. But the area we're dealing with is bounded by Albert Street, Queen Street, Elizabeth Street and George Street. The local landmark here, Hungry Jack's, the building that's in is known as Beak House. That was built in 1899 by the Cancross family. Cancross or Cairns Cross?
Cancross.
Cancross. Here was Hemmant and Stewart, and they had a drapery. And this is where the Great Fire began. There were reports of some young men loitering around here on the street corner, just as I'm doing right now, except they had cigars and pipes and things, and they were flicking cigar butts here and there. Some people thought maybe they were the ones who caused it, but I believe, Sharon, it was actually started in the basement of the drapery.
That's correct, yes. Yeah. It started in where it dipped down into the outside. I believe there was more bales and packing and things outside.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah. So this is it. This is ground zero for the Great Fire of Brisbane. So what we're going to do now is we're going to visit the most prominent places that burned down and find out where they were standing and what's in their place now, what's in their position. And the first one we're going to is Café de Paris. Café de Paris. That'll do, I reckon. What do you think, around about Wallace Bishop? So the Café de Paris was right about here where Wallace Bishop is, and they were renowned for serving meals at any hour. and also had a fine selection of wines and ales and spirits. Oh, and the bedrooms here were known to be very light and airy. So the Café de Paris was here, and that got pulled down by the fire department to help stop the spread of the fire southwards.
Some of these buildings were quite interesting in that they had, at the front, they were quite small, but they would have a shop on one side, a shop on the other, and then a small alleyway and 2 shops inside.
Yeah, okay, alright. So there was that side access.
Yes, it would be enclosed, it would be inside the building.
Right,
then
okay.
it would be an upper level where people would
Oh, right, I see what you mean, yeah.
And
Okay.
often you would find an accountant or an architect or someone who didn't need a shop front would rent the building upstairs.
So just moving up one little bit from Wallace Bishop, we've got this empty building now. That's a fine late 19th century building. But here was Albert Hockings. Now, he was a seed and plant guy. He also had an outlet over at South Brisbane. And I visited that, or as close to it as I could, in my West End video. Now, his outlet here was made out of brick and stone. But that didn't stop the fire, it still came through here. Most of his stock had been removed onto the street. Oh, and Mr. Hockings was once the Lord, or not the Lord Mayor, he was the Mayor of Brisbane. So that's Hockings' place right here. So this is one of the entrances to the Myer Centre, and we come to George Edmondstone. He was a very early settler here in Queen Street. In fact, he was so early that he first set up shop in the old convict barracks, which was just over that way there. And he was a butcher. He was the very first butcher here in Brisbane. I'm reckoning, well, we reckon that the first butcher shop by George was right here. And George first would have his sheep grazing on land which was now on the slopes leading up to the windmill, to the old windmill, but it was soon realised that that land was becoming quite valuable, so he moved them over to Newstead to graze his sheep, because this was in the days before refrigeration, so you couldn't chop up the meat and then store it. You had to kill them and then chop the meat and serve it pretty quick, especially in December. And just after the fire, George continued trading. He set up his butcher blocks just out here on the pathway and kept serving the public their meat, what was it, beef and mutton and lamb. That was pretty much, that was the staple. Now we're at the site of where the old Victoria Hotel used to be. I don't know the build date of the Victoria Hotel. It does appear on this 1844 map, so the hotel was already in existence by that time. And it was the very first hotel here on the north side of Brisbane. You see, South Brisbane was where the hotels were, and they were getting the trade from the squatters and the traders coming up from the Darling Downs on their way to Brisbane to do their trading, but they would stay in hotels at South Brisbane overnight before coming in here into town. So it was very difficult to establish a hotel here because the guys at South Brisbane were getting all the trade. But there was something I read in your book about privacy wasn't a big thing at the hotel, like some of the door handles didn't have locks, or there weren't even handles on the doors or something.
And I don't think the walls went up full to the ceiling. They were just partitions.
Yeah.
So they were open rafters.
And so that way, and I read in there that someone crawled along the beams and fell down into this guy's hotel room and then fell asleep on the floor. Yeah. They were the funniest people in the 19th century kids, like the guy who was writing expired dates on the eggs.
Oh, Arthur Hodgson.
Yeah, that's right. Because he didn't want anyone to have the eggs, was that right?
That's
so
right.
This guy would take up all the eggs from the kitchen and write a date on there that was like 2 or 3 weeks previously, so that no one would eat the eggs because they thought they were expired. That way he had a ready supply of eggs.
They picked up the beset.
Yeah. Did they take it up that way towards George Street?
They did.
They did? And that was a Thurston table, was it? That was a Thurston table. Very expensive. Not a lot of those in the colony back then. So forget about the family. Get the billiard table out. And it's hard to believe, but apparently some people used to ride horses and jump over tables inside the Victoria Hotel for entertainment. The greatest threat was not so much falling from the horse, it was the rider hitting his head on the rafters inside. It's totally insane. Later on, a new hotel took the place of the Victoria. Christmas decorations there for, I don't know what shop it is. It used to be the Myer Christmas decorations. This is where used to stand the Union Bank of Australasia, and in this very iconic photograph from the Great Fire, you can see that that bank kind of survived, even though it was in very poor condition. On the left side you had the Victoria, and in the foreground on the right you have the remains of the Sovereign Hotel, which we're going to now. Working our way further up the mall. Now we're outside another former entrance to the Maya Centre. And here, this was the site of the Sovereign Hotel. This was kind of a traditional bush pub. It had the shingle roof and a low shady veranda outside. It was also considered to be, or to attract, a better class of clientele here. In its location here, it looked directly across Queen Street to where the new town hall was being built. That unfortunately no longer exists anymore. City Hall took its place and function around the corner. So yes, the Sovereign Hotel was the place to be seen in 1860s Brisbane. And you can kind of see what we're doing is we're looking for the old property boundaries. And here you can see where it says Uptown. Over the side, just over there, that's the corner where the York, was it York Hotel or just York Building? It was just York, 1929. But there is a definite line where that building finishes and the modern facade of the former Maya Centre. And you can even see it at ground level down there. There's the one kind of building material for the wall and then another. So yeah, this would have been, we're pretty sure, Sovereign Hotel. And we're going to, you think this is where the Sovereign was?
Yes, because
That's the York.
so I just feel I remember coming here.
Okay.
Higher up the wall, so that might change.
So Sharon's of the opinion that the York building there, 1929, York Hotel, was where the Sovereign would be, which is just there. I mean, we're thinking it might have been here, but it could very well just be there as well. Let me know what you find out if you can see something of the ancestry of this building, but that'd be good to know whether the Sovereign was there or here. It's just a matter of metres, but we want to get it right. So after furious discussion and argument and threats, we think that, no, it didn't really happen. We think that Ben Palmer's cheapest emporium, and this was another drapery emporium, you've got to wonder how many drapery stores a small town like this actually needed. His place was directly in line with the Old Town Hall. Old Town Hall is over there. That's about the halfway point. So Ben Palmer, wasn't it? That was his name. His drapery was round about here. So he opened in 1863, a year before the Great Fire came through. Luckily for him, much of his stock was rescued by passers-by. He put it out here on the street, or on the edge of the street, and afterwards he had a monster fire sale. That was the guy, wasn't it? He had the monster fire sale. But then, as luck would have it, in 1868, a fire broke out in his store and it was destroyed then. This fine building here at the top of Queen Street is the old Bank of New South Wales. There's been a bank on or about this site since the mid-19th century. The first one was pretty much just a wooden shack. Now, that first Bank of New South Wales was destroyed in the Great Fire. There was a second bank built on the site. That was in stone and brick. Here's a photo of it. And then the third one went up. And that's this absolutely gorgeous building. But it's not a bank anymore. There is a very nice bar and restaurant on the inside. In 1929. It's going across George Street, and we're looking for the site of Mr. Pillow's Humpy. Now, to me, Mr. Pillow's Humpy sounds like a dodgy kids' TV show from the 1970s. So, standing outside the Treasury building now, and across the road, where you can see that maroon colour building. Is it maroon or maroon? From that building there, along the street there, to where it says king size, something or other, men's tailors, we think that there was the site of Mr. Pillow's Humpy. Now, Mr. Pillow was a fellow who showed up with his family one day, and they moved onto the vacant ground. Now, what was the guy's name who was using it?
Robert Cribb was the owner.
Cribb, that's right, Cribb. Mr. Cribb, Robert Cribb, he had his animals just grazing around on that bit of vacant land there, and then Pillow and clan, they showed up, erected a tent or tents and structures, a humpy, and began living there. Cribb was not terribly happy with this. Then he got some group together, some tough guys, and they stormed onto the ground to throw out Mr. Pillow and demolish his humpy, but a fight ensued. Cribb got thrown over the fence into the street, and Pillow remained with his family on site there, living in his humpy for how many years was it? How many years do you reckon? He was there for a while. He was there a year or 2 years or something. And until the fire, that's right, because Cribb couldn't get him off the land, and the guy who actually owned the land was in Sydney, and he never actually came up here and saw it. Cribb went to the courts, it just dragged on, but the courts couldn't dislodge him either. The only thing that got rid of Mr. Pillow's humpy was the Great Fire. So this was the northern extent of the Great Fire. It didn't go any further than this. Now the top of the Queen Street Mall, and round about 11 p.m, the fire came to an end. It was still smouldering in many places. 50 homes and businesses were destroyed in that fire, and about £60,000 in damages, and incredibly, no one was killed. There were a few injuries. A couple of guys fell through a roof, but otherwise no one died. And the following morning, as everyone were beginning to pick up the pieces and try and make sense of what happened, they found that a number of law enforcement and soldiers were drunk on the wine and booze that they found lying in the streets. So they weren't too much help in the restoration. The Great Fire of Brisbane in 1864 really set the scene for Brisbane to transition from being a little tiny frontier town into the beginnings of a proper developing modern town, and then into a city. And it wouldn't be for another 17 years until 1881 when Brisbane finally got a fire brigade board. 17 years from that destruction to having the first fire brigade board. That's got to be some sort of record. Thank you very much for watching this show. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Sharon, who's now just disappeared. Ah, there she is. She was hiding behind that modern sculpture. Thank you very much, Sharon, for coming along on this walk.
It's been absolutely fascinating.
It was wonderful to see these things on the ground, rather than just reading about it, then to go out and look and explore. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Worries. I've learned so much as well. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. We'll collaborate on the next book. Thanks for watching. If you like the channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you again on my next walk. We're finished with our trip now, and thanks once again to Sharon for this. If you're interested in the Great Fire of Brisbane, here is Sharon's book, Brisbane Burns. You can get this from the Australian Academic Press. How much does it go for?
$25.
$25.
Plus the postage.
Plus postage. Brisbane Burns, excellent read, highly recommend it. I'm not giving this back to Sharon because I want it. It's all mine. And thank you so much, and cheers to us.